recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think this is really important because the difference is it appears just from reading the report, he has, and we heard all about exonerated and all of those different things. It appears from the report he met every actual element of the crime. So I want to talk about the department principles on federal prosecution, because that actually has nothing to do with the underlying elements, correct? It's whether or not you can prove this at trial.
Under the department's justice manual and the principles of federal prosecution, a prosecutor has to assess the evidence and determine whether, in his or her judgment, the probable outcome will be a conviction at trial.
So whether or not you meet the elements of the crime, which I think it's clear that he does, the second part of this is this, and that's where it gets into the sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. You could have just said we don't prosecute sitting presidents, but you did not. And you enter this, but that doesn't have anything to do with the actual elements of the crime. That has to do with getting a conviction at trial, correct?
Well, Congressman, part and parcel of a prosecutor's judgment as to whether or not a conviction is the probable outcome of trial is assessing how the evidence identified during the investigation lines up with the elements and what proof can be offered to a jury during a trial.
Sure, but his well-meaning elderly old man has nothing to do with the underlying elements of the crime.
Well, it certainly has
it's a presentation to the jury.
It certainly has something.
Back. Gentleman can respond.
It certainly has something to do with the way that a jury is going to perceive and receive and consider and make conclusions based on evidence at trial, Congressman.
You agree that causing someone to lie to the FBI is a classic example of obstruction of justice?
It is an example of obstruction, yes.
Thank you. Trump also obstructed the Smith investigation by directing one of his employees to move boxes of documents to conceal them from Trump's attorney, from the FBI, and from the grand jury. At any point in your investigation, did you find that President Biden directed his staff to conceal documents from you or anyone else?
We did not reach that conclusion.
You would agree that hiding documents is a classic example of obstructing an investigation?
It is an example of obstruction.
Thank you. Donald Trump instructed his staff to delete security footage so that the FBI and special counsel could not see how he had tried to move and hide documents. Do you agree that attempting to delete video footage in this manner is plainly an attempt to obstruct an investigation?
Congressman, I don't want to characterize the evidence in the case against former president.
But if that happened, would you agree that deleting video footage is plainly an attempt to obstruct an investigation?
Congressman, it's the type of evidence that prosecutors would consider.
To sum up, Donald Trump is charged with willfully retaining classified documents and conspiring to conceal those documents, and he's facing additional charges for lying to investigators. Isn't that correct?
Those are allegations that are in a pending indictment against former President Trump.
And the reason why President Biden is not facing a single charge, Mr. Herr, is not because you went easy on him, but because after reviewing 7 million documents and interviewing nearly 150 witnesses, including the president himself, you could not prove that he had committed a crime.
Well, you got the fact that he had classified material in his possession and control in multiple settings for multiple years, that he told others he was aware of this, and that he shared that material with others. The mind boggles at what beyond reasonable doubt would actually mean.
Well, as I set forth at length in my explanations in chapters 11 and 12 of the report, my assessment is that the evidence, if presented at trial alongside potential defense arguments, would not probably result in a conviction at trial.
Well, that's one of the points you make, is that President Biden's likely to be an elderly, sympathetic figure with a poor memory. But how does that bear on any individual's guilt or innocence? Isn't that, again, a question for a judge or jury to decide after guilt or innocence is determined?
It is.
And again, here's the problem. Donald Trump's being prosecuted for exactly the same act that you've documented that Joe Biden committed.
Congressman, if I understood your question correctly, you said, isn't that a question for a jury? And it most certainly, through the lens of
my question is, does that bear on the guilt or innocence of an individual?
It certainly bears on how a jury is going to receive and perceive and make decisions.
So the answer to my earlier question is correct. All I have to do when I'm caught taking home classified materials to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Herbert, but I'm getting old. My memory's not so great.
Yeah. Congressman,
this is the doctrine that you've established in our laws now, and it's frightening.
Congressman, my intent is certainly not to establish any sort of doctrine. I had a particular task, I have a particular set of evidence to consider and make a judgment with respect to one particular set of evidence, and that is what I did.
You know, since the majority has tried to assert that there is a disparity based on politics in the differences in the prosecution, it's worth quoting page 11 of the report, which says, and I quote, "Several material distinctions between Mr. Trump's case and Mr. Biden's case are clear. Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite. According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it." That's on page 11. Quote, "In contrast, Mr. Biden turned in classified documents to the National Archives and the Department of Justice, consented to the search of multiple locations, including his homes, sat for a voluntary interview, and in other ways cooperated with the investigation." It's clear that these cases are not the same.
From, is it Mr. Raskin? Gentleman from Maryland for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.